So, this week in the Sacred Gathering, we are going to kind of continue the second part of our discussion, just thinking through kind of what is the church, why does our community exist. This is based on some kind of consultation work I've done with churches in the past, just basically asking why questions. Maybe it's just me as someone who didn't really grow up in the church, didn't grow up in the same patterns of church life as others did. Or maybe it's just some of the training, some of the fun we've gotten to have at Wayfarers the last few years. But I think I just lack some of the assumptions on this is what church is and this is why we do it that some do, which puts me in a kind of a unique position to ask those questions again of why is it we do what we do? Is it in fact meeting our goals? Can we in fact articulate what the church is and why we do it the way we do? So that's kind of what we'll be looking at for our own community at Wayfarers this week. So again, we'll be doing a open discussion. I really am excited to hear everyone else's thoughts on it. So this recording will largely be me just reading the quotes that we looked at last week. We'll look at again this week, and then throwing a few of my own thoughts out. But by no means are these the answers to these questions. This is just one voice among many. So we will open with the question: what's the purpose of the church? And do we think most people in churches, or maybe American churches in our current context, understand this? What's the purpose of the church? Why do we gather? What are the rhythms of what we do together? What is the purpose? So our first quote I want us to think through comes from The Liturgy of the Ordinary by Warren. Each week when we gather for worship, we enact again the reality that we are blessed and sent. At times, this big vision of the Missio Dei, or mission of God, can make its way very obviously into our mission and purpose statement, our life goals and vision, but it can be easily lost in the daily grind. For me, being blessed and sent on God's mission seems distant and inscrutable in the annoying tasks like email. Yet each message in my inbox in some way touches on my vocation, or rather vocations. Each has to do with my professional, family, and civic life. This kingdom vision, our identity as those blessed and sent, must work itself out in the small routines of our daily work and vocation, as we go to meetings, check our email, make our children dinner, and mow the lawn. It's easy for me to assume that the parts of my vocation that God cares about are the parts that I like. The rest is dross and doldrums and groaning and necessary evils. Luther said God himself will milk the cows through him whose vocation it is. But could God himself check email through me? Could he balance the family budget and fold the laundry through me? Does he care about any of this? The next quote I wanted us to look at comes from Wolf and a book called A Public Faith. Idleness is a major malfunction of faith. Instead of setting goals and propelling a person toward them, idle faith spins in one place, like a tire stuck in an icy hole. I suggest that there are at least 3 reasons for faith's idling. The first concerns the character of believers. For some people, the faith they embrace demands too much, so they pick and choose, as in a cafeteria, filling up their tray with sweets but leaving aside the broccoli and fish. Second, believers find themselves constrained by large and small systems in which they live and work. To thrive or even survive, they feel they must obey the logic of those systems, not the demands of the faith they embrace. The third reason for faith's idleness concerns the faith itself. The faith either is not applied to new circumstances or does not seem relevant to contemporary issues, from nuclear power plants to neuroscientific discoveries. With these 3 reasons for faith idleness combined, no wonder people misconceive faith and treat it as a performance-enhancing drug or a soothing balm rather than a resource to orient their life in the world. So we'll first just start out asking again, what are any thoughts or questions from those quotes? What do they mean for us as a church community, and what might God be inviting us into personally? And then I'm going to have us look at what is our mission statement as the Wayfarers community. And I know many of the people involved now were not around when we first had these conversations. They may not either know it or recognize that's what it is or think through why we did it. So that's one of the reasons we're going to have this conversation. So the mission statement is sneakily on most of the things we print off. It is intentional community engaged in daily worship, service, and play to bless others and invite outsiders in. And so, how would you describe this in your own words? Does it describe anything unique about our community, or is it vague? And can we practice the weekly rhythms or event of our church be discerned in it? And does it accurately describe who we are? And just as kind of a quick reminder, the wording was very intentionally chosen. So, again, we start with the phrase intentional community. An intentional community is not just saying we intend to be community, but that phrase intentional community is one with a long history within Christianity. It involves both monasticism, it involves the original kind of church and the rhythms they had of worship together. It's one that's been kind of revived in recent years with intentional communities that are living community, like the Bruderhof community or the new monastic movement. Is another version of this, but the idea is we are attempting to make the rhythms of our life in such a way that our faith is lived out in dailiness and some other ways. And intentional communities often are people living together communally, either in a single like house or a group of homes together, or very closely in doing this thing. We've experimented with this personally over the years, and I've always felt that Wayfarers was meant to be an experiment in intentional community, with the assumption that we will continue to live in kind of the normal patterns given to us by the urban suburban context of Colorado Springs. So, what does it look like not living in one big house together? What does it look like for our separate family units to actually live out and be part of an intentional community? And that's part of the experiment behind the whole thing. The other ones are going to come from what I think are just three really fundamental rhythms to how we live out that intentional community. Dailiness. This is not a you do one thing on Sunday and then go back to kind of the patterns given to us by our lives. Dailiness in our worship. Worship, of course, being an attention to God, paying attention to what He's doing in the world, and honoring and submitting to what God would have us doing rather than what we are wanting always to do. And service, taking very seriously the fact that we are called to be other-based, the fact that we are called to pay attention and serve, not just in occasional ways, but in daily, intentional ways. And that can be anything from major projects to little ways of taking care of one another, of bearing one another's burden, but also seeking out the needs in the community around us and following God in doing our best to make things whole and fulfill. So service and worship are two very important parts of what we do. But I also add the word play, because I think that there is meant to be in spirituality an enjoyment, that there is an enjoyment of God, an enjoyment of one another. And I think that if we're not careful, both worship and service can become something kind of this grim duty. And I think we're missing the point, because a daily life of service, a daily life of worship are meant to be joyful. It does not mean circumstances are always going to be positive, but there is a joy and a sense of, I think, going with the rhythms God has given us, the way the universe was designed in worship and in service. And so I think enjoyment and play need to be an important part of what this community is about. And finally, to bless others, to extend the goodness and the blessing, the sentness, as we heard from that Warren quote, from others. It's not meant for us. It's not for this kind of the intimacy of the community, although that's very important. Blessing and gifts are always received for the sake of others. We're always meant to share those, both in and inside of that. And I think to invite outsiders in. And that can mean a lot of things. I think people feel very isolated in our culture. I feel like many of us feel like an outsider in so many different ways. And this idea of blessing, of these beautiful rhythms we are trying to establish here at Wayfarers, those are always an invitation. Come and see, come and enjoy God's presence, come experience community, most certainly flawed community, but community all the less. Come and enjoy worship, come and enjoy service, come and enjoy just God's presence in this community as well. And let people, no matter what that means, that feel like we're an outsider, we're alone, that there is a God who loves them, there is a community who is going to attempt to express God's love, and that's what we're doing, inviting those who feel like they are alone and outsiders to a place where they can belong, a place where they can be in, and not an exclusive way, always inviting outward. So that's kind of some of what's lurking behind this mission statement. Again, is it a good description of what we do? Is it a good description of who we are at this point in time, or was it just an ideal we had all these years ago when we started this community? And the final questions on here are, what are our intentional practices around discipleship? Again, that word for us is the same as an apprentice, right? Of looking at skills and ways we would like to be growing, and do we have a plan to be growing in the knowledge and skills of a life well lived, of spirituality enjoyed in God's presence? So what does it look like in our community? What's our vehicle? What are the actual times we get together? What are the books we're reading? What are the ways we do these things together? Do people have access to our lives? Are we too private and too busy to allow people to even come in and see what it is we do when we live? And do we have a way of shared language and articulation of this together? And again, these questions all come from kind of the consulting side of what I do. But it helps people kind of think through those questions. Okay, if this is what we value, um, is it in fact being shown by what we're actually doing in our community? And if so, can we articulate, these are the actual things we do together, these are the events, these are the times and places we're together, these are the meals we share, etc. Is it giving people access to our lives? And can we articulate it kind of quickly? Here's why we do what we do. That's the point of all this, to be able to tell people what it is we are attempting to do if we need to, or even articulate for ourselves what it is we're doing here, why it feels the way it does. And then, of course, question, is it in fact what we're doing, or is it what we're meaning to do, but the rhythms of our life, the ways we talk, actually are saying something quite different, which I think is something all communities, particularly spiritual communities, have to be very careful of, because it can happen to all of us. So that's kind of what we're hanging out with this week, starting the new year, just examining again who we are. Are we living into what God's invitation is? Are we living lives of daily worship, service, and play? Are we blessing others? Are we inviting outsiders in? Or do we need to just scrap this whole thing because it's simply not who we are and what we're doing, or more importantly, what we feel God is calling us into? So I'm looking forward to this conversation with everyone this week. Yeah, so this is how we're starting our sacred gathering and the new year out. So happy new year, everyone.